Okay, we are back with another Between the Pages book set, and today we have fantasy author Justin Pike, who's here to talk about his Far Shore Chronicles series. And I'll
Hmm.
turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Like she said, my name is Justin Fike. I have been writing informally for probably about 20 years and writing intentionally and publishing as an indie author for about 3 years now. And yeah, I work really hard at telling the kind of stories that I spent my whole life trying to find as a reader and never felt like I got enough of, and work to try and do that. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the series, but the main series I'm working on right now is called the Far Shore Chronicles, and coming up on a box set release next week, actually, for the first three books in the series. So that's been exciting.
Yeah, it's an audio book too, isn't it?
Yeah, I recorded the audiobook for the first three books for the box set as well, so it'll be digital and audiobook.
Yeah, and congratulations for recording your own audio
Yeah,
book
thank you. It was
because yeah, I took a course on how to do that. It was a free thing, and yeah, no, I'm not about to try it.
It was quite a learning curve. I will admit, I spent more than a few late nights just pulling out my hair trying to figure out how to make everything come together. I actually really enjoyed the narration part, and like working out different character voices and audio narration. I have a bit of a theater background, so that part was a lot of fun and not too challenging. But the technical side of mastering because I did all the editing and all the production and like mastered the final versions to send over to the publisher. That part was so intimidating and like so many numbers and terms that I had never encountered before. So definitely a big learning curve there. But now that I've gone through it one time, hopefully all the future ones will be smoother. But
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun overall. I actually really enjoyed it.
yeah. Okay, so why don't you tell everybody what the series is about?
Sure. So the premise of the Far Shore Chronicles, in terms of the setting, like the world that it's set in, is imagining a world where a little bit of like New World colonialism, like early Jamestown era America, but when kind of people from the old world arrived in this crazy new continent, instead of finding it, more or less similar to our world, that they got off the boat and discovered that it was populated by all of the myths and legends and magic and creatures and races and all the things from their old legends and their folklore and mythology that everyone had always grown up believing were just stories for kids. And the world is sort of a kind of a post-Roman cultural influence. So I have a lot of fun playing with the old world gods and sort of the new world races and all these this kind of clash of ideologies, clash of cultures, where things that everyone had believed not only weren't possible, but now are probably like heretical, maybe, or maybe they're not. We're trying to figure all this out in this strange new world. Is set, and the main character, whose name is Charity, is an orphan who grew up as a thief in Byzantia, the sort of the greatest city in the world, but is sentenced to exile in Far Shore to work kind of because it's partially a penal colony. They send all the like petty criminals there to work the fields and the mines and so on. So the first book opens with her kind of stepping off a prison ship in this world that is full of impossible things and dangers, and she has to learn and adapt really quickly to stay alive and sort of stay one step ahead of all these strange new things while she gets her feet under her. And of course the adventures go on from there, and crazy things happen after that. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really like the setting because it gives me room to play with a lot of the traditional fantasy dynamics. Like you have your dwarves, your elves, your whatever, but I worked really hard to put what I think of at least as an interesting twist or a spin on everything, and kind of reinterpret everything in this space and in this setting. And so I get to play around with a lot of the things that I grew up loving, but kind of put my own slant on them. So that's been a lot of fun.
Okay, so you mentioned in the world that the original continent is Byzantia and that it has a Roman influence. So is that sort of based on the later Roman Empire and Byzantium?
Yes, yeah, kind of a post-Roman imperial 13th century Rome, Byzantia, Eastern Roman Empire kind of feel. Yeah.
Okay. So one of my favorite eras.
Yeah, me too. I mean, my background in my undergraduate background is in history, medieval and early and late medieval European history
Yeah,
specifically. So it was a lot of
yeah.
fun to
And
pull from all of that.
if you haven't read it, you should really read Guy Gabriel Kay's Sailing to Tarantium.
I
Uh,
love him and I love those books.
oh
He's one of my
yeah, my
favorite
favorite.
authors. I've read all of his books and those
Mm.
are some of my favorite. Yeah, those are fantastic. Great
Yeah, I
recommendation.
love what he did with those two books.
Yes, he's amazing. I love the way that he writes historical fantasy that's incredibly well grounded, and then
Mm.
reimagines a place based on some of those familiar elements. No,
Yeah,
I love his books. He's fantastic.
yeah. I got to meet him last year and get his autograph. So,
You're kidding? Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous.
yeah,
So cool.
he made a guest appearance at our local convention
Oh
in
man,
Halifax, and yeah, so,
that's so great. I would love to meet him someday. That's definitely
he
on my
was really nice.
bucket list. I've
We
heard he's
chatted for
really
about 5
nice.
minutes because
Yeah,
we had to get
I'm
keep the
sure. Yeah,
line
you
moving, but
got the line going, but yeah, no, that's so cool. Yeah, his writing has definitely been a big influence on me, and that style of trying to kind of flesh out and realize a setting that is familiar in a lot of ways if you're familiar with different world, real world cultures, real world history, but then to take that as an inspiration for some new things and then tell a new story in that space. I love the way that he does that. And I mean, I'll be honest, like his books are thicker and kind of more, they're slower paced. The Far Shore Chronicles is a bit more of like an action adventure series. But I still work really hard to kind of to have that same element going on where there's those kind of familiar dynamics and then getting to play around with some of those things.
yeah. Okay, so you mentioned action adventure, and of course, your main character is a thief.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the main character.
Charity, my goodness. I have this huge soft spot for Charity. She's my favorite. She's a very interesting character to me. One of the things that I try really hard to do when I'm creating characters is to introduce inconsistency into characters. I think because if you think about a lot of times when you go through and you've got you're filling out a character template or you're coming up with a character idea, it's easy to sort of check boxes, but then they become really two-dimensional and it's easy to expect what they're going to do, where most people, like most of us, are actually really inconsistent. Like, we wake up, some days we're in a great mood because we had a good breakfast, and other days we're not, and different aspects of our personality come out more in some situations. So she's very, impulsive and kind of has a temper and a smart mouth, but also she's very, very smart. So one of the elements in Byzantia with the different gods, Vesta, who's the goddess of knowledge, her priestesses that live in these sort of like scholar library temple cloisters. One element of the way that their religion works is that every cloister always has an orphan that they adopt off the streets, and they teach them like everything worth knowing, kind of like as an act of devotion to their goddess of knowledge and wisdom who knows everything. And so Charity was actually pulled off the streets at a young age, like about 5, and raised in a Vestan temple. And she's naturally incredibly smart already. So she's actually she's both a thief who has that kind of survivor's instincts and grew up in the gutter, and has a bit of a chip on her shoulder about it, to be honest. But at the same time, she's also better educated than most noblemen are. And so she's also very, very good. She's been trained to like think things through and analyze situations. And she pulls from like, she knows all the classics and medicine and anatomy and science and all these different things. And so it's always interesting to sort of see, to me at least, when I'm writing her, which aspect of her personality is going to kind of take center stage in that particular moment, how she's going to act or react. She has a very, very strong like survivor ethic, like do what you have to do to stay alive, take care of yourself. No one else is going to look out for you. And the closer you get to anybody, the more likely you are to get hurt. At the same time, she really wants a family and wants to belong somewhere a lot more than she even realizes. So one of the fun elements for me of the storyline is that in the first book, she ends up kind of getting thrown together with this ragtag group of like misfits and people, characters from the different races in Danann, in the New World. And initially, they're all just sort of blackmailed that they have to go do this suicide mission, essentially. And then over time, they sort of grow closer together as they survive things, and they become this kind of weird, scrappy family. And so, her own tension of experiencing that shift where she realizes that she's coming to actually care about these people and care what happens to them and care what they think about her, which is really uncomfortable for her and feels really vulnerable. And then, of course, they have their fights and they have their falling outs and their misunderstandings and so on. And she kind of has to learn how to be a person in relationship instead of just cut the world off and survive on her own. So I really enjoy writing her because I feel like she has a lot of layers and a lot of, those kind of inconsistencies that make her exciting and interesting.
Okay, so does each book have its own antagonist, or do you have like a series antagonist that runs through it?
Yeah, the way I've written it is each book has a really defined story arc that ends clearly at the end of each book. But the series introduces a main antagonist, more in book 2 primarily, and then sort of the events of that book and his goals, and what sort of gets unleashed in book 2. The first 6 books, the first, what I call volume 1, are sort of about their attempts to stop him from doing what he tries to do, which is kind of their fault. Not spoilers, but it's sort of their fault that he's doing what he's doing anyway. So definitely each book has that connective thread of trying to deal with this situation. But then within each book, there's definitely a real specific dynamic or element of what's going on, what's the main threat that has emerged, and what do they need to do to survive or to hopefully come out on top.
Okay, so you mentioned that the Far Shore world has all these creatures and legends in it. So what kind of legends and mythology did you pull from to create these creatures?
A lot of old European myths and mythology. So, elves, dwarves, but again, I spin a lot of it. So, for example, the dwarves are actually like Viking pirates. They hate being underground. They live on the frozen islands in the north, and they roam the oceans, and everyone's terrified of dwarven warships on the horizon kind of thing.
That sounds cool.
It's really fun. I don't know. The dwarves in my world are hilarious. I think they're very fun. The halflings are not your typical sort of lovable, laid back halflings. They're based a lot more on sort of Mesoamerican culture. So they live in the southern jungles, and everyone in Danann is absolutely terrified of halflings because they're, super ferocious jungle fighters, and everyone knows, like, if you go into those jungles, you will be captured and probably sacrificed, and someone's probably going to eat your heart. Like, they're terrifying. The elves are actually they used to kind of rule everything, but their empire was shattered about 500 years ago, and so they're actually almost more like a refugee community that live in these small bands. So not like your classic, like, everyone looks up to the elves, they're so amazing and noble, and they have this like ancient history. It's like they have that past, but their current experience is a lot rougher than that. So trying to find different ways to take probably the closest analogs of where I'm pulling inspiration from would be traditional fantasy. So elements that you would find familiar. But then, like I said, like finding ways to say, how could I root this in either some different cultural connection that maybe is different, or some way to sort of turn the trope on its head, and then have fun getting to explore what that looks like.
Okay. So what was the hardest scene or type of scene for you to write in the series?
The hardest scene?
Yeah.
I think for me, the hardest scenes to get right are the quieter scenes where people are just talking. Action scenes sort of write themselves. I feel like it's, you have your immediate threat, and then you kind of like, you write out the action in a clear way that the reader can follow what's going on, and the pace moves along really quickly. And I really, magical duels and sword fights and all that kind of stuff like that is a little easier for me to do. But I feel like the thing that really gives a story its punch are the moments in between those high point action heavy scenes where characters have to kind of come to grips with what's happened so far, especially, within this little group, Charity's little group of friends, the dynamics where it like trying to because I have to balance like 6 characters. There's Charity, but then there's 5 other characters that are in every book and get a lot of screen time. Like, they're solid secondary characters. So kind of giving everyone adequate screen time so you get to know them, but not dragging the story down with lots of backstory or lots of, flashbacks, I guess, or different things that would to kind of tell their story and where they're coming from. So always trying to balance that out where, those scenes keep moving adequately as well and the pace is good. But you're getting a chance to slow down, catch your breath, get to know these people a bit more. And a lot of times that comes through conflict or disagreement. I mean, they come from, like, the races of Danann do not get along well with each other. So they often are, at odds with each other, or they've got sort of baggage or things they're dealing with, in their own relationships with each other, or different ways they want to approach a situation. And so, yeah, getting the pace right on those kinds of scenes where the reader has enough information to understand why someone is reacting a certain way or feels so strongly about something. But at the same time, it's not like, pause, let's take a time out and talk about where Nataka comes from and why she's so upset about this thing that she just saw. Like, you can't really do that, or it sort of kills the story pace. So those are often a little more challenging to get right and kind of get the balance right on that.
Yeah. Okay, so what's your favorite type of scene to write?
Probably those action scenes. I really enjoy those moments where, like, especially the climax, right? The end of the book where all the threads come together. And I always plan the end of the book first. That's almost the first thing I figure out in the story is, like, where's it going to end? And sort of what's the thematic payoff so that you can, build that all the way to the end. And what's the action payoff? Like, really I want it to be something memorable and something where you're reading it going, there's no possible way that they're going to come out of this alive. And then at the end, it feels inevitable. Like, oh, of course, that's how they solved it, and trying to kind of hit that balance. But yeah, the action scenes where, people are thinking on their feet and right on the edge of, life and death, and magic is flying around and all that kind of stuff. I enjoy those scenes a lot and enjoy planning them out and then writing them as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, do any of your secondary characters steal the scenes or have quirky moments?
I feel like personally, and I have heard from a lot of readers, that Sheska is a little bit of a scene stealer. So she's the halfling in the group. She's actually more kind of a middle-aged hunter from the southern jungles. And in the first book, it's not too much of a spoiler, she and Charity form this life bond that she takes very seriously. And so she treats Charity sort of as a little sister who is pretty hopeless and needs to be protected and guided and probably put in her place as much as possible. Sheska's quite ruthless and extremely capable and does not care at all what other people think. So there's a lot of very interesting situations or moments where she will just kind of say the thing that everyone's trying not to say, or do the thing that everyone's like, what just happened? I like Sheska a lot. She's a really fun character who shakes things up quite a bit. And I've heard from a lot of readers that she's a bit of a fan favorite, and I probably does steal the scene more than a few times, I think.
So which one of your characters would you like to hang out with in real life?
Oh, in real life, probably Alaron. Alaron is the wizard of the group. He's an elf, and he is his primary focus is on divination, which is kind of a useless-ish school of magic. Like, it's not terribly practical. And one of the challenges of divination is that the more you see the future, the crazier you get, because it's really hard to hold on to your sense of what is actually really happening in this time stream when you're constantly hopping around seeing all these different time streams. So one of the ways that he deals with that is through humor and kind of living as much in the moment as possible when he can. So he's a bit of a goofball, not your typical stuffy elven wizard at all, and kind of a life of the party sort of guy. So I think probably if you were just going to hang out and get a beer, he'd be a fun one to do that with.
Okay, so of course you write fantasy, but are there any other genres you write in, or other genres you'd like to write in?
I would really love to write some science fiction. I actually have 2 different science fiction concepts, like series, in mind that I would love to do at some point. And I've always enjoyed reading science fiction as well. And then just straight up historical fiction without any fantastical elements to it. I have a series planned that I would love to get to someday. That's historical fiction set in early medieval Spain, and each of the books would follow a succession of the kings and queens of early medieval Spain through about 300 years. because they were just such fascinating characters who did such insane things. I think their lives would be really, really fun to dig into and tell those stories.
Yeah, that does sound fascinating. I love historical fiction.
Yeah, me too. It's one of my favorite genres to read.
Yeah, okay, so I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your book.
Sure. So, first place to come hang out would be on Facebook. If you search for the Far Shore Voyagers, that's my private fan group. A really good group of people, a lot of fun, and that's where I do a lot of behind the scenes information. I'll do a lot of live talks there and share my thought process, or sometimes I'll read excerpts from a draft in progress of the current book I'm working on before it's been released. That sort of thing. So a really fun place to hang out, and just a good group of people we have a lot of fun together. So that would be a good place to connect. My website is just justin.fike. That's my email address, justinfike@.com. You can find me there and get more information about my writing and books. And then, of course, on Amazon, the Far Shore Chronicles, the first box set. So the first 3 books will be releasing on August 12th, along with the audiobook series.
Okay. And thank you for being here. It was a pleasure chatting with you and meeting a fellow Lee Gabriel Faye fan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was really fun.
And that's it for today. And we'll be back sometime later in August, because we do not have a sign up for next week, but we do have some for later in the month. So we'll see you then. Bye for now.
Awesome. Bye.